Many thanks again for joining us, and thanks to Joseph. And you're watching Newsnight. Tonight, we would like to focus our attention again on South Sudan. And here are the numbers we'll probably be talking about tonight. About 62,000 are still holed up in the UN complex or are being protected by the UN mission to South Sudan, UNMISS. And 23,500 refugees have already crossed over into Uganda. We have another estimate of about 30,000 before the end of this week, but also 200,000 refugees, of course, dotted around the IGAD region, that is Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda. Millions internally displaced in South Sudan, and the conflict continues to rage on as talks are being held in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Let's now turn to Andrew Mwenda, who is journalist, the CEO of the Independent magazine, the old man of the clan, a fellow of Stanford and Oxford. I could go on. All right, Andrew, the crisis initially was looked at as a very small issue, an issue between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. We discussed this last year. Yesterday and the previous day, we did see military were across from the Ugandan border to Sudan, South Sudan. And we had a confirmation today from the army spokesman that Uganda has deployed, especially to reduce bloodshed in southern Sudan. But also we know that President Museveni threatened Riek Machar if he does not cease fire. Now his team in South Sudan, the negotiating team, says Uganda should pull out of South Sudan. Your take?
Well, first of all, I think I have one problem in the sense that sometimes to understand why a person takes a particular decision, it's important to talk to them. So I don't know what intelligence President Yoweri Museveni has or what information he has that is guiding his current actions on South Sudan. Now, without knowing what his motivations are, I will just discuss from an abstract standpoint. First, I had told you last year on this show that if there is a conflict in South Sudan, it will inevitably draw Uganda into it. Because remember that Uganda is the guarantor of the sovereignty of
South Sudan,
of the independence of South Sudan. And Uganda is also a signatory to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement which was signed. And always I had thought that if there is to be a conflict in South Sudan, it would be simulated and stimulated by the North. And if it was generated by, as it has right now happened, by internal political disagreements, it was in the interests of President Bashir and the regime in Khartoum to take sides, if only to undermine the evolution of a more stable political dispensation in the South. But what we are seeing is very different. Yesterday, the General Bashir, the president of Sudan,
flew into Juba,
and offered to support Salva Kiir. In fact, I had thought that it was the North Sudanese government, that is Khartoum, which was supporting Riek Machar,
who was actually
worked
with
Bashir before. But then, that action yesterday surprised me. Now, let me come back to Uganda's involvement. Holding other factors constant, I think that this is a misadvised adventure by President Yoweri Museveni. Because you see, Maurice, whatever we may say, Uganda and the UPDF and Yoweri Museveni cannot resolve the problems of South Sudan. Only the people of South Sudan can resolve their own internal political differences.
As a guarantor of the peace accord, as a friend of Salva Kiir, as a friend of Rebecca Garang, who's allying with Riek Machar, he clearly is the right man.
Yes, but you see, if I was in President Yoweri Museveni's shoes, again, remember, I'm holding other factors constant because I don't know what are the subjective motivations for his involvement or what intelligence he has. But I think that first, Uganda cannot solve the problems of South Sudan. Uganda can help the Southern Sudanese solve their own problems, but Uganda cannot solve it for them. The nature of the intervention that Museveni has taken is a wrong one. For example, he has issued an ultimatum against one of the warring factions. That is in disregard to the internal differences that brought about the current conflict. Now, realize that the problem of South Sudan right now as we speak is not necessarily military. That is the manifestation of the problem. The primary problem is political. There is a disagreement inside the SPLA and SPLM as a political party over the leadership of
President
Salva Kiir. One, they're accusing him of the very things he was accusing Garang of using the party in running the party from his pocket or from his briefcase, not allowing internal democratic structures that can hold him to account for what he's doing. That's a very important and legitimate point. Two, the contours of disagreement are not necessarily along ethnic lines, although most Nuer supporting Riek Machar.
Yes.
But you have very many Dinkas, led by the wife of John Garang, the Dinkas from the south, who are also on the side of Riek Machar. So we clearly see that his political base, even at an ethnic level, has shrunk. 3, within the government, he has been running one of the most corrupt and unaccountable government. I am not suggesting that the opposition are there for, regardless of what they are saying, are going to bring about a clean government. But at least they have issues they are rising. To respond to this internal disagreement, political disagreement, he responded by dismissing them. But let me tell you, in physics they say that every action has equal and opposite reaction. In politics we say a politician, whether his name, cannot strike a blow without calculating the effect of its rebound. You see, President Museveni here can afford to fire anybody and get away with it. You see, President Kagame in the south, down south, he can fire anybody and things remain stable. I'm not so sure if Uhuru fired Ruto, whether things will remain stable in Kenya. So you must calculate your balance. As a decision, you clearly see that Salva Kiir's biggest challenge was that he was involved in a coalition where he wants to exercise a level of political control which he does not have. In fact, you see, there are two forms of power. There is formal power, or what they call de jure power. You can put in the constitution, but it's what they call effective power. That refers to the balance, the actual balance of power between the different contending political groups. It clearly shows that in the military, his position is not untenable and is not very strong, and in the political world. And finally, if Salva Kiir was such a great leader, why does he need Uganda to prop up his government? Why? Uganda, Museveni has faced so many rebellions from different quarters, from Western Uganda, Northern Uganda, Northeast, West Nile, even Itongwa here in Buganda. Have you ever seen Kenyan troops, Tanzanian troops marching in to defend the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the state of Uganda? So Museveni's entry into South Sudan, I cannot understand what is motivating him, because you see, ultimately, Museveni wants to create an artificial winner and an artificial loser. And let me tell you, at the Victoria Conference of August 2nd, 1998, to discuss Congo, Museveni gave a brilliant speech. You should read it. Everyone out there, you read it. Museveni was disagreeing, was saying this idea of invading a country and removing a government creates an artificial winner and an artificial loser. The loser loses artificially, the winner wins artificially. Once you have somebody winning artificially, then what is the incentive? The incentive for Salva Kiir now is for every domestic problem, he will want to leverage the strength of Uganda in order to consolidate his domestic position. That means that you are undermining his incentive to seek internal political and social integration, because ultimately he must be able to seek a level of political accommodation between himself and Riek Machar and the other political forces. But Uganda's entry with all these tanks and APCs and all this undermines his incentive. Now he can sit on the back of Uganda's military strength and issue threats and orders. And I am sure that Museveni's entry into South Sudan is going to undermine the peace negotiations that are taking place in Addis Ababa.
Doesn't this contradict what you experts and analysts have continued to say with the lack of enthusiasm within the African continent and African leaders to actually solve Africa's problems? Museveni has actually said, listen, I have seen a problem. I've discovered there is a crisis in South Sudan, and I can only be the only person probably at the moment that can actually send troops into South Sudan, backed by the UN force, to protect, one, the civilians in South Sudan, any other people that are in South Sudan, businesses and property, plus, of course, try and not have a repeat of what happened in Rwanda, with one ethnic group going after another.
But you know, first of all, I don't belong to that group of analysts who say that Africans should intervene in the internal affairs of other people.
African nations.
Of African nations. Perhaps I'm not against intervention, I'm against the nature of intervention. First of all, you are saying that the government of Uganda is intervening for humanitarian reasons, yes, to save lives. Let me tell you, even if that intervention was successful, it can only achieve short-term humanitarian objectives, but at the price of disabling the very mechanisms that you need to build a more stable and durable solution in South Sudan. And I made this argument about Congo,
yes,
that the Tanzanians and the South Africans can intervene under the aegis of the UN. In the short term, they may save lives, but in the long term, they will prolong that conflict for the next 3 decades, and they will create a worse problem. So you need a conflict to follow its natural course, whereby one side emerges as a victor, or both sides are exhausted by fighting and try to accommodate each other. But the point I want to make about Uganda, yes, is, you see, Uganda's involvement is even much more dangerous. Why? Because the South Sudanese state must evolve either political institutions that can accommodate and harmonize political contestation Two, it must develop internal military capability to defend itself. If you begin babysitting it now, then you are undermining the very incentives they need to build a strong military to be able to survive on their own. And three, Maurice, remember, wars are about people, their livelihoods, their culture, their property, and so many things. So, if you say that the people of South Sudan, in this conflict, the civilians, are victims that must be protected by the international community, what are these people fighting over? Salva Kiir and Riek Machar. I would imagine that they should be over fighting for the support of those people. So each one of them must develop capabilities, political structures, like you saw Museveni develop in Luwero, of how to organize the people, not to be passive recipients of international charity, vegetating in international camps and spectating over a struggle that is shaping their destiny.
But getting involved.
Ordinary citizens must be active participants in the struggle that is supposed to shape their destiny, either as suppliers of food, as suppliers of recruits to the rebel armies. They must be also as because
or peace brokers, as members of negotiating.
You see, Maurice, when any war, to win a war, you need the support of the civilian population.
Yes.
To win the support of the civilian population, whether you're a government or a rebel group, you must trade security and participation for recruits, for food, for intelligence. So if you say that the international community is going to protect the civilians and leave the two warlords to fight on their own, then you are disarticulating the political struggle from the very people and constituents it is supposed to promote.
Right.
And I can tell you what you will create is a Konyi-like rebellion in South Sudan.
Yeah, all right. Mwenda, many thanks. We really have run out of time. This discussion on South Sudan will continue, and we will continue to bring you some insights into this conflict, of course, as negotiations continue and peace talks continue in Ethiopia. That update, we will continue to update you on what's happening there and so much more. We're taking a very short break, but after that, we'll have the latest in business.